Professor Dutta. Thank you so much for joining us. Very happy to have you today.
Thank you so much, Christina. I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me here.
Awesome. So today we're talking about who should CEOs cater to or manage their companies for. Is it shareholders, is it employees, or even vendors or customers ultimately that they should manage their company for?
Right. So this is a really interesting question. And, this debate, shareholder versus stakeholder, has been going on for over 2 decades, right? And what I find really interesting is that this idea somehow that they are in conflict with each other, that they are at odds with each other, right? So let me just begin by saying that, shareholder primacy, or this norm of corporate governance that the company's top management or CEOs should make their decisions focusing on the interests of the shareholders above everything else, that came into prominence in the 1970s, right? With Milton Friedman's statement and his works that is the goal of the top management, to prioritize the benefits or the interests of the shareholder, which means to maximize profits, right? That wasn't always the case, however. But in the recent years, we have actually seen a shift from that shareholder-focused business governance. And there are a lot of reasons behind it. Businesses have to adapt, right? So, like I said, this has been going on, this debate has been going on for quite some time. And it was only recently, last year, at the roundtable that top executives came together and they put forward this statement of purpose, redefining what the goal of a corporation or a company is. And essentially what they did was put this idea of stakeholder theory in paper. So what are these? What is the stakeholder theory and how is it different from shareholder theory, right? Mm-hmm. So the stakeholder theory, is just more inclusive. It's just a more holistic way of governance, right? The shareholder is not excluded from stakeholders. If you look at who are the stakeholders of a company, you will see employees, customers, suppliers, and shareholders are also a part of this body of stakeholders, right? Mm-hmm. So this idea is very interesting that they are somehow, these two approaches are at odds with each other. We have seen studies, research papers that actually show that if a company invests in its employees, if a company invests in satisfying its, or pleasing, not just satisfying, but pleasing its customers, leading to customer loyalty, that has an effect on the economic bottom line, right? Mm-hmm. And we have also seen the whole concept of firm performance changing. So when we had the prevalence of the shareholder theory, or this idea that your goal is to just maximize profit to benefit your shareholders, it was also popular because if you think about it, it's a very easy, or I won't say easy, but a straightforward way of evaluating a firm's performance. How well is your firm doing? Look at the financial gains, right? Look at the stock prices. But that has again changed a lot. Now we talk in terms of the triple bottom line. We talk about economic, environmental, and social performance. So companies have been adapting to that. And we see as a result of these concepts of corporate social responsibility, sustainability, that there has been this slow shift towards prioritizing the stakeholders, right? You have to invest in your employees. You have to make sure that they have minimum wage, that they have proper health care. You have to make sure that customers are satisfied, that you have strong partnership with your suppliers. So I feel, if we frame the question like, should the CEOs prioritize immediate returns, or should they prioritize long-term value creation? So that is what this boils down to, right? Because if you look about just maximizing your profits in today's environment, you're looking only at the short-term returns. Whereas if you look at the community that you're serving, if you look at the society at large, then you think of value creation. Then you think of your value not in this year's profits, not in terms of that, but how you are doing in the long run, right? Mm-hmm. So I read this in an article. I think it was a Harvard professor who said that the shareholders' benefits, that shouldn't be the goal. Profit shouldn't be the goal, but it is really an outcome, right? So that, I think, is the approach that CEOs have been taking up, and it is definitely a step in the right direction. So, this shift, we have observed that in industry practices, and we have also seen studies which show empirically that if you look at the interests of your stakeholders, then you do end up, having financial or economic gains. What the roundtable last year did was just put that in words and put it out there. And I feel it was long overdue, honestly.
So that's a follow-up question that I had. So because it's so long, so we talk about Milton Friedman and what he came up with in the 70s. So 1970 to 2019, why did it take so long?
That's, again, a very good question. And so like I said, it took so long to put it on paper and put it forward like this, but it's not that, it came out of the blue last year. These changes, we were seeing these changes. And I think, a major contributor to this is the fact that we live in this age of social media, right? I really feel that, and we see that, how powerful social media campaigns can be. We have the cancel culture now, right? Mm-hmm. So, and if we look at these changes, these gradual shifts toward looking at what's best for the environment, what's best for the society, you will see that there are these crucial points. If we look at, the fashion industry, it received a lot of backlash at one point because of the unethical practices. Mm-hmm. So, this is a classic example of shifting from shareholder to stakeholder theory, because the idea that the manufacturing plants were of these fashion companies, textile companies, they are in developing economies or underdeveloping countries, is that they want to reduce cost, right? To minimize cost, they're outsourcing their operations. But what that ended up doing was that these subcontractors or suppliers in those countries were exploiting the cheap labor. They were violating the environmental restrictions, right? And we saw how all over the world, there was this backlash when news of the sweatshops came out. That really forced the fashion industry, I won't say completely changed. There are still, a lot that can be done, but there were these initiatives. You have the Sustainable Fashion Coalition coming up that was spearheaded by, I think, Patagonia and Walmart, right? Patagonia as a company itself has, set such high standards for green supply chain or sustainable supply chain management. Mm-hmm. So we see that these examples have been coming up, in the last decade or so. Why it took them so long to really come together and put out a statement, I really can't answer to that. But what I can say is that we have seen these changes, even though they didn't have that, as a commitment on paper. These shifts were becoming more and more prominent. And I think the fashion industry is a great example of how they were trying to adapt to the backlash. And, again, I mean, if you have an unhappy customer nowadays, they will, put up a complaint, but they will also put the word out on social media, right? So companies, I think, can't really risk that in today's day and age.
Yeah, very good point. So what about now the COVID environment, right? So now there's this big shock to the system, to the financial health I just have to wonder, is this going to set us back in our evolution? If we're saying there's this evolution in the setting, but it's so comfortable back in this old way to just focus on the bottom line, and now it's a little bit of a shock to the system in its survival mode, right? Whether you're a Fortune 500 company or you're a little startup that's just starting up, and some are probably not even around anymore, but everybody's in this, my sense, is in this survival mode. How do you project, how do you think this will affect this movement? If we say there's a movement, is this setting us back, or is it business as usual and we're going to keep progressing?
Again, this is a really excellent question, and it's so pertinent, right? Yes, of course, there is this need to focus on cash flows, right, to sustain your business right now. But I think this COVID situation is going to push us forward in the right direction. And I'll give you like small examples. We don't necessarily maybe think of these, but just the fact that, all these companies have made work from home a norm for this entire year. Why is that? Because they care about the health of the employees. They don't want to risk it. So here we see companies looking out for their employees, right? When we see grocery chains having a certain hour just for elderly customers. Why is that? This is keeping in mind their health conditions, right? So we see these changes. Uber has made it mandatory that if you're getting in the car, you have to wear a mask. So this, in a way, is looking out for customers or stakeholders' benefits, right? This is in their interest. So I think if anything, COVID-19 is gonna really provide an incentive, or it's gonna provide an impetus to make companies more focused on stakeholders. If you think about sustaining in the long run, again, we're going to talk about sustainability, and sustaining in the long run, you have to take into consideration that your customers are so vulnerable, right? That your employees are vulnerable. So you have to provide healthcare benefits. You have to make sure that your suppliers have that kind of financial backing from you. So if anything, I really think that the COVID-19 situation is gonna make us progress in the right direction, or continue this shift in the right direction. I also feel like if you look at the industries that have been hit the hardest by the pandemic, one of the industries is the meat industry. And if you look at the practices in the meat industry, it has been criticized as being one of the most unsustainable industries, right? The amount of greenhouse gas emissions, or in general, the way the supply chains in meat industry is managed. And we see that that is the industry that has been hit the hardest by this pandemic. So we will see in the long run that companies which are more geared towards stakeholders and their interests are going to do well in the long run.
That's great. Let's hope so, right? So, because it would be such a shame. We are going through something quite drastic, and it makes one wonder. But at the same time, we've come such a long way that hopefully we are not going to see any undoing of
Absolutely
the whole progress.
And I think, again, I read it somewhere, I can't remember exactly where, but the author of this article was saying that it's not that COVID-19 created these issues in our businesses. These inefficiencies were already there. What COVID-19 and the pandemic did was made it impossible for us to ignore these issues in the business models. So one of the key factors in succeeding in this situation will be transparency. Even when we talk about the CEOs putting forward the statement last year at the roundtable, there is this idea that, is this just for publicity? Is this for PR? Or is this, something genuine? Is this a genuine commitment? And again, in terms of even the COVID-19 situation, I think what is going to help companies establish themselves as corporations or as bodies that are really committed to the society, to the communities that they're serving, is transparency. Again, this will bring me back to, the example that I gave for fashion industry with Patagonia, right? Why they have been so successful in managing their supply chain sustainably is that they have such a transparency across their supply chain, with their suppliers. So just press releases won't suffice. Like you said, we need data, we need access to data, right? What exactly is going on? So if we have those things, if we have access to data, if companies are putting forward this kind of data, and more analysis, more studies, whether it's case studies or whether it's academic research that can be conducted, I think that will help us go forward.
Yeah, and I think ultimately the companies that figure this out, the whole transparency, because it's just the world is demanding it at this point. Your consumers are becoming more sophisticated and they're demanding this kind of transparency. I think the ones that take that jump, because at first it probably doesn't feel right and it's scary to have transparency, because it's so much easier to operate without it. But I think the ones that figure that out the fastest, they're probably going to do the best in the long run, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I shared the same thoughts with you.
Awesome. So this has been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you once again, Christina, for inviting me. I really enjoyed our conversation.